Hey, good afternoon, everybody. When I say Nelson, you say Atkins. Nelson, 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 Nelson. See, I say that so in case somebody's in the wrong place. And I just wanted to make sure you knew who you were. Wow. Thank you guys so much for being here. It lets me know that you're willing to see what's going on here at the Nelson-Atkins Museum of Art and that you're going to be inspired, engaged, and empowered tonight about the production we're going to put on. But before I go a little bit further, may I obtain permission from an elder to speak? Thank you. First of all, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Karen E. Griffin. I manage community engagement here at the Nelson-Atkins Museum of Art. And again, I want to thank you all for being here. But I also need to thank our new community partners. Give them a round of applause. Just go ahead and clap. So our community partners that are joining us today is the Women's Network, Mid-Continent Public Library, Greater Kansas City Black Studies Group, Shawnee Town Museum 1929, the Association of University Women, the League of Women Voters, KC. Yes, see, they proud, they standing up. But I also want to say thank them all for this collaboration and joining us today and the support. But the most special thanks I need to send out to is thank you to the volunteers, the team guys, and the staff and members. Yeah, go and get some love. Get some love. Because without their support, this would not be possible. Now, please take note. Ida B. Wells cannot join us tonight. She is on a mission, but you're going to hear a little bit about her. So do me a favor. I know a lot of you have your digital pacifiers. You have them, right? You guys know what that is? Okay. Please do not record. Please go ahead and turn off your ringer now so everybody don't look at you later. Sit back, ladies and gentlemen, relax, and enjoy your cup of tea.
I am Susan B. Anthony, and I am more than just a coin. I am curious how many of you even have me as a coin in your pocket, in your purse, or am I just a novelty? Was I just collected and put on a shelf someplace or in a drawer? I'm curious. Some say that I was just a publicity stunt, I believe in the 1970s, when I cannot fathom that you were still working on trying to pass an equal rights amendment. I'm sure in your time we have settled all those issues by now. I believe a journalist referred to me that I was to be the Goldilocks of coinage. Not too large, not too small. I was to be just right. I believe there was a problem. I was to be an answer to a problem. Isn't that the way it is too? Women many times must answer to problems. Because the male coin of $1, a presidential coin, I'm sure many of you maybe know who that is. I'm not sure myself, but the presidential coin was just too big. And so seemed the time and the place for a woman to be on a coin, but just a little bit smaller. Doesn't it always come down to money? You'll hear today from others that it seems like it does always come down to money. Still does. I found out, too, that, in fact, I was cheaper to produce. 3 cents. That very cumbersome presidential mail dollar coin was 8 cents. My goodness, I'm hoping in your time you have taken care of some of those discrepancies that exist between the value of women and the value of men. They also, at one time, decided that it was to be a shared coin. We can't just feature one woman on a coin. Again, it must take 2 women to do the work of one male. I was quite honored who they wanted to place on the coin with me, but I felt she needed so much more than just a coin to honor her. Harriet Tubman. Harriet Tubman, who I considered a close, dear friend. Harriet Tubman, who had worked so hard. And I just felt quite privileged to be alongside her as we tried to end slavery. But why? Why should that be shared? She deserves oh so much more than just a coin. I am Susan B. Anthony, and I am more than just a gravestone that I hear now some generations take pilgrimages to, and they put on a sticker that says, I voted. Perhaps some of you have heard about that in your time. Again, I am one to admire somewhat of a publicity stunt, a way to get attention. But again, it wasn't just me. I am honored, but it wasn't just me. I voted too. They tell me illegally, but there was no such thing in my mind when it came to that illegal vote in 1872. And it wasn't just me then. 13 others, relatives and dear friends of mine, went along. When we registered, we simply argued what was there in the documents, what had been there decided years, decades before. We the people. I was part of that. It said we the people. It wasn't we, the white male, nor we male. It was people, all people. And I thought I had the right to vote. And so we did. It didn't take long for me to be arrested. I was waiting for that. Again, money becomes part of that too. My bail was $1,000. And after a trial where I was found guilty and I was not allowed to speak at all, my fine was $100. And I let them know they would never see any part or any coin or every bit of that $100 because, again, I committed no crime. I voted, and it was my right. Through many social reform issues of the time, and I'd been brought up in a household, a Quaker household, where issues of the time were freely spoken. Men, women, girls, boys. We were sharing our dreams and our wants for what a future of freedom for all would be, whether it abolishing slavery. And as I became an educator and I saw the destruction that drink brought about into families and homes, the abolishment of that demon alcohol, we all worked together. We all had a voice. At least I thought we did, until I tried to speak at a temperance gathering in my state and was told that, oh no, the women should not speak. Or when I tried to speak up as an educator at a teachers' conference, and once again was told, oh no, the women do not speak. When do we get a chance to speak, I wondered. And fortunately, through these many social reforms, I met other like-minded women who helped me with my voice. Some right at this table. Some you might be familiar with, Elizabeth Cady Stanton. They called her the voice of the movement, such an incredible writer, and many times I took what she had written and spoke to the public. But they called me the vision because I was the organizer. I was also the old maid, so perhaps I had time to organize some. Oh, I knew the names and such they called me. But I had been working a long time in some of these social reforms. And I wanted to help that next generation to keep that vision going. But I can look back now and see my vision sometimes was short-sighted. My vision sometimes was blurred. My vision sometimes left out people that had been longtime friends of mine. Frederick Douglass had always been a friend of mine in my family and my household. And he and I parted ways when we did not see the same on that vision. The vision on who should vote and when they should vote. All the work we had done before the Civil War, and I felt after the Civil War, well, now it was our time. We, and I can say now we, I meant the white women, will bring the rest of you along. And others became impatient with my vision, and rightly so. I was the vision, and I realized sometimes I was a distracting vision. I was distraction sometimes because maybe I tried the fashion of the time. Oh my goodness, wearing the bloomer outfits. They didn't realize a maid like me traveling along. It was tough traveling and giving speeches. I simply wanted to be comfortable. But if they would not listen to me because of how I looked, I decided I had to take away that distraction, take away that vision. Oh my goodness, the caricatures and the effigies that they made of me. I know I was the maiden aunt. I know I was the old maid. But I knew that we had such important work to keep doing. And I had worked for decades and decades. And I knew when I needed to hand it over to dear friends of mine that had been doing that work out in other states. In Western states, things were happening. Even in Kansas in 1867, that heroic Kansas to strike the word male and to strike the word white when they described who would have the right to vote. And I sent incredible women there to do the work. I myself traveled. But again, sometimes in that work, our vision gets blurred, our visions get short-sighted. And now they say, and then they refer to the amendment with my name, Susan B. Anthony. But there were so many other names. There are so many other voices, voices that are not at the table, sisters that I stood beside that sometimes I did not support, sisters that needed to go their own way and speak their own truth. But I am glad that I was there at least for part of the marching. And I hope that the marching still continues.
Good afternoon. I wasn't aware if I was speaking professionally or if I was here in a more candid appearance. It looks like I'm here candidly. To speak on all things equality. You may know me from my writing. I'm Lucy Stone. I've been writing for the last few decades into papers that have been all over the country and a few internationally. I've written on things from equality for women, for the abolition of slavery, and so many more. My family brought me up to think that you should speak out even if your opinion is a little contrary to those around you. Growing up in the hills of Massachusetts on a large farm, I could run as fast as my feet would take me. I could jump over fences. I could wade through streams. I could explore worlds in my mind unknown to anyone else. I could see myself as anybody in the world and untouchable. Now, I tempered a lot of my behavior because of my mother. I could see how hard she constantly worked, making sure every living creature on our farm was healthy and content. And it made me take a step back. I even faked being healthy on a regular occasion so she wouldn't have to help tend to me. And part of that has really shaped who I see myself as today. I could see my mother tirelessly and endlessly poring over the last bit of stitching or darning for the night, or making sure that everything was tucked in. And you could see her giving herself into all of the work in her domestic sphere. And it wore on me. And I didn't have the words growing up to be able to explain my frustration with what I saw. But as my education has allowed me, I have now more and more seen this idea of the slavery of domesticity in the domestic realm and how the American legal system has been part of it. And it struck me as odd that my parents, being ardent abolitionists, couldn't see that themselves. They couldn't see how women were slaves in their own home. And this opinion, yes, made me a bit of a dark horse in the Stone residence. But my mother had instilled us some strong moral convictions. Not Quaker, like many of my suffragists, but Christian light. And she'd instilled with me that conviction to speak out even if it was an unpopular opinion. And I thought, what else could I do that was particularly unpopular? And I decided to attend college. And I became the first female graduate from college in all of Massachusetts. And I bounced around a few of them looking for the right college to graduate from, because I realized many of them were actually finishing schools for missionary wives. And that was not the education I was looking for, because, you know, if you're going to send a woman out into the plains to make things nicer, you should probably be a little more educated. And I looked for a slightly different education approach. I even became so well known and popular within my college, they asked me to write the commencement speech. I wasn't allowed to give it, but they would have a male colleague of mine speak at that. I declined the offer, which, thinking about where I've really gone in my life, kind of took the 90 degree on that, and I became a fairly well-known orator. So taking that education I had, in 1850, I organized the first women's rights convention in Massachusetts. It's pretty exciting. I even invited some people like Susan B. Anthony to join us in our fight. This was a couple years after Seneca Falls, which I was pretty bummed to have missed. But I invited these women, and our voices became united, and we put words into what we felt was all things unequal, not just suffrage, as that became kind of a challenging point for many to gain women's equal rights. But we looked at society, and we looked at how women's work was the bands of steel that surrounded society. And the spinning wheel and the loom, which became part of women's work and how we could earn income in our homes, started going away, being replaced by machinery. Women started losing that power of their own purse as society industrialized. And so we looked elsewhere to what other ways could we feel like we're part of society. We could be mothers and wives. We could teach summer school, not regular school, summer school in the summer for $1 a week, and we were supposed to be content with that work and feel in part of our society. But as women, we looked to that and we said, this sphere was not for us. And many would look and talk to us and say, what do you mean not for you? If you were to change spheres, that would fly in the face of Providence to unsex yourself. Many would call us monstrous women to do so. Their names. We, monstrous women, started making strides. In the past decade, women have made so many changes. Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell became the first female doctor in the whole country, and she was followed in suit by her sister, Dr. Emily Blackwell. And you could tell they were raised in a home that had that conversation of equality. So much to my non-interest, I did allow their brother Henry to court me, and we did marry, but on two conditions, because that was not in my plan. The first condition was that we must remove the word obey from our vows. We even were ardently, and I say we, Henry is a very big supporter of women's equality, which being surrounded by strong women is good for him. But no, we made sure to make the local newspaper understand. We wrote our protest into the paper and said we must remove this term obey, because no woman should be required into voluntary servitude for the rest of her life, and no man, if they are honorable, would exercise that servitude, and nor should they have that power to begin with. So it ruffled a few feathers, to say the least. The second one ruffled even more, which you can see my excitement. I refused to change my name. This is my identity, and my name is my identity, and to lose my name is to lose myself. So I refused to change my name and have remained Lucy Stone. Moving forward, apparently there were some women who thought that was a great idea, and they called themselves the Lucy Stoners. So I was, world renowned right there as a stoner. Sounds interesting. It did get me into trouble in a couple ways. I was not allowed to vote in local elections because I wouldn't write down Lucy Blackwell. So, progress in different ways. But this work has caused me to travel all over the country. And in 1867, I actually was here in Kansas, there in Kansas. And we were working on removing the term male and the term white from their constitution. And the referendum did fail, but it did kick up this frenzy of thinking about what could we do. And in 1869, as the 15th Amendment, enfranchising African Americans took hold, it broke part of the suffragist movement. It split us a little bit. There were some who wanted to push for a national constitutional amendment for women to get to vote. And then there were the rest of us who wanted to see it happen state by state, because we saw what the progress needed to happen. So Susan B. Anthony joined the national and created her national campaign to change. And myself and Julie Howe Ward, we worked to go state by state. We could see the energy in the West. We could see how much women had already taken on the men's political sphere. They took over the farm when the husband died. They would take over driving the wagon train west if the husband was incapacitated. So if women could do men's work, why couldn't they have men's political voice? So we took to the road and we pounded the pavement for years, arguing for women's rights and working to have state constitutions changed, kicking off here in the West. Women's realm and women's political power is what I wish to leave with you in thinking about today. A final thought as we think about how suffrage is getting along. Half of this country is disenfranchised. We have no political say in our own lives or in the lives of our children, in the lives of our husbands. We have no legal voice whatsoever. When my mom, when she was on the farm, any property she brought in, she couldn't own. Any property she created, she had no legal say over. She couldn't even have say over us as children when push comes to shove. And she's the one that had us. I can't stand by and not allow for our voices to be heard. But I can't do anything about it legally. So that's why I ask you gentlemen. Half of your voting population isn't enfranchised. We have no legal say. Enfranchising us would be progress. And progress can be scary. It can challenge what we think and how we feel. But progress like this is empowering. And I ask you, you men, are you brave enough to empower the women in your life?
My name is Carrie Chapman Catt, and I am a suffragist. I have always been a suffragist. The Susan B. Anthony Amendment passed Congress on June 4th, 1919. And after 75 years of your work, we were all celebrating. But we knew the work was not done. You see, the amendment had to be ratified by 36 states before it became law of the land. By March of 1920, we had 35 states. So in May, we took the lobbying campaign to Delaware. And it looked like a sure thing until the anti-suffragists showed up with gifts and money and threats. And we lost. It was a disastrous disappointment and a dangerous shift in our momentum. We now had to pin all our hopes on Tennessee, a southern state. And that's what you want to hear, isn't it? The Battle of Nashville, the War of the Roses. I can tell you all about it. I was there. But taking all those details would take us all night. No one who was there will remember it with anything but a shudder. You know how it ended, but you have no idea how hard we fought and how close we came to disaster. To draw the battle lines and to simplify it for you, I will divide it by our colors. The yellow roses were worn by the suffragists. That included all my people as well as Alice Paul's people, although they weren't under my command. She was leading them from Washington, which was a blessing in my opinion. Yellow was our color. The men who supported the suffragists also wore the yellow roses. The red roses were the opposition. This included the anti-suffragists, or the antis, and all the men and women who were working for the rejection of the Susan B. Anthony Amendment. They also had politicians and newspaper publishers and business interests, like the railroads, and some man named Jack Daniels. Prohibition was in effect. It just didn't have much effect on Tennessee. I arrived in Nashville in mid-July and planned to only stay a few days. I rallied my troops. We made a list of all the delegates. I assigned my suffs to get a pledge of support from every man on that list. And then we made a second list of who was most bribable, because they would be the ones to change their vote, of course. Next, I met with Governor Roberts, a yellow rose, but he was waffling on whether to even call the special session to vote on ratification. When I pointed out how I could help him with the press, he warmed up some and did as I asked. But I knew he would do nothing decisive until after the primary on August 5th. Politics is a game of fear and favors. In the meantime, word of my arrival had attracted some attention, and the opposition began to arrive, most of them staying in the Hermitage Hotel, as was I. The next morning, I received a letter from a red rose named Nina Pinkard, only it didn't arrive in my mailbox. I saw it when I opened the pages of the Chattanooga Times. It began, "Mrs. Catt, Southern women abhor political combat for our sex." And then it went on to ask me what I could possibly have meant when I said that all American men and women, white or black, shall share equally in the privileges of democracy. The race issue could not be avoided in a southern state. The gauntlet had been thrown, the pressure began to build, and I knew I had to stay indefinitely. Both yellow and red roses began to zigzag their way across Tennessee, to knock on doors, to give speeches, to get pledges. I started in Memphis and got pledges of support right away. So I gave a statement to the press that we had the votes we needed to get ratification. I was moving on toward Knoxville before I saw headlines that said otherwise. Tennessee doubtful, politicians relieved, Suffs losing Tennessee. One Red Rose delegate actually answered the Democratic leadership with this. He said, To support the 19th Amendment, I shall have to lower the standard of Southern womanhood. It will go a long step toward degrading American homes. We'll have to surrender the cordial principle of states' rights. It will double the Negro vote of the South. And so on and so on. He covered all the same old points. I was back in Nashville when Governor Roberts finally called the special session to vote on ratification. It was to begin on Monday, August 9th. It was at this point that I confined myself to the hotel along with any other outsiders. Only Tennessee Suffs could be seen lobbying for the cause. Now, it was a particularly hot and humid summer in Nashville, even by Tennessee standards. The Hermitage Hotel became headquarters for the Red Roses, the Yellow Roses, the press, the lobbyists, and the undecided. I was still getting poison pen letters through the newspapers. Everything we did drew a crowd. Union Station was busy with all the delegates arriving, and they were met on the platforms by women offering them a red or yellow rose for their lapels. Those women would then follow those men around town to take them to dinner or a picture show, to help them make up their minds, or be sure of their convictions, or persuade them to change sides. The undecided garnered the most attention. Monday, the special session started. Tuesday, we got our first betrayal. Seth Walker was Speaker of the House in the Tennessee legislature, and he had firmly pledged that he was a Yellow Rose. Sometime on Sunday, he changed sides. Betty Graham saw him in the lobby of the Hermitage Hotel on Tuesday evening and loudly asked him just what kind of crook he was. "Are you a crook for the railroads?" Betty Graham was one of Alice Paul's people. This is how they did things. Unfortunately, it just embarrassed and insulted Seth Walker, who was now firmly a Red Rose and the wrong man to be on the wrong side of. He was a master at manipulating his Congress, and his tactics would prove to us that we didn't have a single vote to spare. Friday the 13th rolled around, and we had good news. The Senate got to work. They had to have hours of speeches first, of course, and then they voted on the amendment. And they let the Tennessee Suffs sit beside them on the Senate floor as the vote was called. The vote came in at 25-4 in favor of ratification. I heard the roar from my window, and I saw all my Suffs hurrying down the hill to bring me the good news. And I turned to Harriet Upton, a longtime colleague and friend of mine, and I said, "Well, now we have 35.5 states." My Suffs did bring some bad news, though. In one of those speeches that morning, a Red Rose senator had managed to deliver a speech that insulted everyone. But he spent a little extra time on me. He said he based it on he accused me of not being a racist, and he based it on my statement that suffrage democracy knows no bias of race, color, creed, or sex. The weekend came and didn't give anyone a chance to let down their guard. I was busy dodging attacks from the Red Roses and keeping my Yellow Roses on their toes. Bribes were flowing freely. $100 just to go home and not show up for the vote. So my Suffs took shifts to patrol the halls and the taxi stands and the train station. Anyone caught trying to lead was gently guided back to their room. The Red Roses, on the other hand, became more aggressive. Harriet opened the door to the suite several times to find a man crouched there with his ear to the door. I thought our phone had been tapped, and we found out that the telegrams we were sending were being intercepted by the antis. I stretched out on the bed one day just to close my eyes for a few minutes and found a bottle of whiskey under my pillow. One reporter summed it all up best when he said that no one will look you in the eye when they say they will vote for it. Monday came, and Seth Walker gave a statement to the press that we got him whipped to a frazzle. We certainly felt frazzled. Tuesday, August 17th, began like all the others with hours of speeches on the floor of the House while I sat at my window and waited. I had learned that the Tennessee Suffs had acquired a small replica of the Liberty Bell and planned to ring it when suffrage was won. Throughout my years, I often spoke of the moment when women would win their political freedom. I would say, the bell of liberty would surely ring then, because there is nothing so powerful, so irresistible as an idea whose time has come. I told that to my Suffs in 1916, to Congress in 1917, and to President Wilson in 1918. But that morning in 1920, I had to wonder if I would ever hear it peal. Those men in the Capitol were giving the same arguments that Aunt Susan had heard decades ago. That morning, as Seth Walker and Joe Hanover, who was the floor leader, and a yellow rose, were trading long speeches, a telegram arrived for Congressman Charlie Brooks that his wife was seriously ill and he needed to go home. And it was genuine. His was a critical vote for us. Seth Walker immediately moved to adjourn the session till morning. Joe Hanover begged Charlie to stay for the adjournment vote, and he did, but he could stay no longer. The session was adjourned. Walker had delayed us again. Now, a charter train was arranged for Charlie that would take him directly home and wait for him overnight to bring him back in the morning if his wife pulled through. Our strategy meeting in my room that night was bleak. I was at a loss for any encouraging words. Wednesday, August 18th. My Suffs donned their white dresses and their yellow sashes and went to find their men. From my window, I saw people coming in from all over the city and beyond. Entire families brought picnic baskets and found a place on the lawn or the steps of the Capitol. In my room, the mood was more solemn. I was tired, my troops were worn out, and Charlie Brooks had not returned on the train. We did not have the votes to win, and we knew it. I was told Governor Roberts was over in the Capitol already, and he was calling in certain delegates for a talking to. Betty Graham saw Harry Byrne entering the building. Now, Harry Byrne was the youngest congressman in the Tennessee legislature. And when she saw the red rose on his lapel, she said she was disappointed. She said, "You said you would not hurt us." "I meant that," he said. And as he made his way into the chamber, a page laid a letter on his desk. As the first speeches began, Harry Byrne read his letter. Seth Walker and Joe Hanover walked the aisles, patting backs and whispering in ears, and I sat at my window watching and waiting. And then Speaker Walker tried to table the 19th Amendment. Those who were worried about voting on it would feel safe, and suffrage would simply die. What a brilliant move. The vote on that motion went back and forth. Harry Byrne voted aye. The surprise came when Banks Turner, a red rose and supposedly a good friend of Seth Walker's, voted nay. At the end of the vote, it was a tie, 48-48, no majority. Well, the count was disputed and a heated discussion followed, and they repeated the vote with the same result. So the motion was thrown out. The amendment could not be tabled. Seth Walker was furious. He called for an immediate vote on Joint Resolution Number 1, the Susan B. Anthony Amendment. As the roll call started, Harry Byrne touched the letter he had received, now in the pocket underneath the red rose on his lapel. And when his name was called, he simply said aye. The clerk moved on, and it took the Suffs a few minutes before they realized he'd just voted for the amendment. They raised a bit of noise, and then they realized it still could just bring a tie, so they settled down to listen. As the roll came out of the S's and moved into the T's, Seth Walker went to stand behind Banks Turner, and when Turner's name was called, there was silence. The clerk called again and nothing. The third call was also answered with silence, so the clerk marked him as not voting and moved on. At the end of the roll, the clerk asked the speaker for his vote, which of course was nay. And it was a tie, 48-48. The auntie stood about to raise a cheer when Banks Turner stood up and said, "Mr. Speaker, I wish to be recorded as voting aye." The roar in the chambers must have been deafening. I could hear it clearly from my window. I saw my yellow sash stuffs hurrying down the hill, singing, rushing to bring me the news I had waited my whole life to hear. That might be why I didn't notice Harry Byrne climb out the window on the second floor, scoot along the edge, and climb in another window, to be seen coming out of the lobby minutes later and merging with the crowd. Congratulations poured in from all over the country and all over the world. And although I knew I still could not go home, I issued this statement. Our mothers began it. And so it came on to us as, in a way, a sacred trust. And a great part of our rejoicing today in our time of victory is compounded with our feelings of loyalty to the past and our satisfaction that we have stood faithful to its trust. The next morning when the session began, Harry Byrne asked to be recognized and asked that his statement be recorded in the House Journal. He said, "I wish to state that I changed my vote in favor of ratification, first because I believe in full suffrage as a right. I believe we had a moral and legal right to ratify. And I know that a mother's voice is always best for a boy to follow, and my mother wanted me to vote for ratification." Saturday came around and my suffs affirmed ratification and sent it on to the governor to certify. And that's when I heard the sweet sound of the Liberty Bell being rung by the suffragists on this chamber floor. A week later, as I was finally headed home, I stopped to visit President Wilson in Washington, and he asked me what I was going to do next. I said, "Women cannot stop. The National cannot stop. With a new purpose, the women of the National are lined up under a new name, the League of Women Voters."
Hello, I'm Alice Paul. Some of you may have heard of me from my work as a suffragist. Let me tell you how that all started. I was born in Mount Laurel, New Jersey, as a Hicksite Quaker. As a Quaker, I was raised to believe that men and women are equals, so I never had any other idea. My mother was a member of Mrs. Carrie Catt's organization, the National, and I attended suffrage meetings with my mother when I was growing up. In high school, I enjoyed reading, softball, playing basketball, and field hockey and tennis. And I graduated as the valedictorian of my class. In college, I chose biology as my major, not because it was my favorite, but because it was the subject that I knew the least about, and I wanted to learn more. I also participated in student government, and I heard my very first song in college and attended my first dance. After graduating at the top of my class, I went to England to work on my master's and study social work. While I was there, I attended a rally, and Christabel Pankhurst was giving a speech all about women's rights. She was being disrespected by some men in attendance. They were shouting horrible things at her. I had never seen anything like it. I introduced myself to Christabel afterwards, and I became friends with her. She introduced me to her mother, Mrs. Emmeline Pankhurst, the most famous suffragette in all of England. The Pankhursts took me under their wings, and they taught me what it was like to be a real English suffragette. The way they were doing things in England was very different than America. Mrs. Pankhurst taught me to make big moves, to get attention, because the best way for a woman to have a voice is through the press, and you need to get attention from the press. So in England, we picketed, we protested, I climbed rooftops, broke windows. We interrupted the speeches of politicians by shouting, "Votes for women!" And I got myself arrested 7 times. Mrs. Pankhurst taught me that when you are arrested, you should be treated as a political prisoner. I demanded to be treated as such, which means you are allowed to wear your own clothing and not the convicts' uniforms. The matrons didn't listen to me, and they tried to force me to undress. I fought them off, and then they brought in male guards to undress me. It was humiliating. Mrs. Pankhurst taught me that a way to fight from the inside is with a hunger strike. They didn't like that, because if we had died from starvation, then we would have become martyrs. Then the force feeding started. I was tied down to a chair. They stuck a tube down my throat, put a funnel on top, and poured liquids down it. It was barbaric. By the end of my stay, I had to go to the hospital to receive medical attention, and I've suffered from gastritis ever since. When I returned to America, I wanted to work on my PhD. I wanted to go to Princeton. However, it was run by a man named Woodrow Wilson, and he didn't care to have women or people of color attend his university. So I got my PhD in sociology from the University of Pennsylvania. After graduating, I followed in my mother's footsteps, and I joined the National. I wanted to bring some of the things I had learned from Mrs. Pankhurst back to the United States. My first big idea was a parade in Washington on Pennsylvania Avenue to coincide with the inauguration of the new president, Woodrow Wilson. I wanted to have Inez Milholland in the lead. She was a socialite and a lawyer. She was going to be on a beautiful white horse. Several women were going to be dressed in Greek robes, and Inez was dressed as a woman warrior. I wanted to show the world that suffragists were not all the stereotypes of spinsters and old maids. I wanted to show the world that suffragists could be strong, smart, beautiful women warriors. A male suffragist shared my views. His name was William Marston. He saw the images of Inez Milholland as a woman warrior, and he used them to create a character which he called Wonder Woman. There was lots of symbolism in the parade. I wanted to get a lot of press because we had 8,000 marchers in the parade, and I wanted all the focus to be on us instead of the arrival of Woodrow Wilson in Washington. We had several countries represented, with the countries that already had suffrage in the lead. All the states were represented, with the states that already had suffrage in the lead. We had women and children, male suffragists as well. There were women workers. Women who were working in factories, doing the same jobs as men. They deserved to vote like men. They deserved the same salaries. Another part of the parade had women with advanced degrees wearing commencement caps and gowns. This was the part of the parade that I was marching in. I also arranged to have police protection there for us. On the day of the parade, Ida B. Wells Barnett and 60 other Black women joined us. I was glad to have their support. As a Quaker, I was raised to believe that all the races should be treated as equals. However, some people at the National did not share my views. I was told that we would need the support of the Southern delegates, and they wanted Ida B. Wells and the other women to march in back. I had to deliver the news to Ida, and she left the scene. We thought that she was just going to watch from the sidelines. But the day of the parade, as the Illinois delegates marched by, she stepped in from the sidelines and joined her peers, marching with them. I have to admit, I admire her gumption, and I was proud of her. Helen Keller was also a part of the parade, and she was going to give a speech at the end. However, there were some male onlookers who were not happy about the parade. They were tearing at our banners and our clothes. They started physical violence against women. The police just stood by, doing nothing. Helen Keller felt unsafe, and she left the scene, so we did not get to have her speech at the end. However, we made headlines across the nation, coast to coast. Everyone was talking about Ida B. Wells and Inez Milholland. We got even more press than the arrival at Woodrow Wilson at the White House. My next big idea was a nationwide petition, which would start on the West Coast and go across America. Sarah Bard Field was in charge of the petition, and Mabel Vernon went ahead of her to arrange greeting parades so people would know that the petition was coming. They went through Kansas City, and we made headlines in the Kansas City Star. Over 500,000 signatures were created, all on one very long scroll. Now, I don't like to speak out against Mrs. Carrie Catt and the National. However, we had some disagreements. I thought that our focus should be on passing the Susan B. Anthony Amendment. However, some people wanted to wait to see if maybe each state would eventually come along. Also, Mrs. Catt thought that some of my ideas were too radical, too aggressive. She thought that I was making a spectacle. First, I was told that they would not give me any funds for my parade or my petition, and I would be responsible for my own fundraising, so I did. Now, they wanted me to send back the money that I had raised on my own back to them. So, I cut my ties with the National, and I started my own organization, the National Women's Party. Me and my best friend, Lucy Burns, moved to Washington to start our party. Several other women joined us, including Mrs. Elva Belmont, who was a socialite and multimillionaire. She was my biggest supporter. I also started a publication called The Suffragist, and I had meetings with Woodrow Wilson at the White House. I nicely asked him to support the amendment, but he made it clear that he was not going to endorse it. So, I started the Silent Sentinels. Over 2,000 women participated over 2 years, 6 days a week. We dressed in all white, we held banners, and we stood silently outside of the White House. We were the very first people to ever picket the White House. In 1917, I was invited to a celebratory breakfast for Miss Jeanette Rankin of Montana, as she is the first woman to be elected to the U.S. Congress. Mrs. Carrie Catt was also there, and it was awkward, but I wanted to set aside our differences because the focus should be on Miss Jeanette Rankin. And I didn't join this movement to fight with other women. Shouldn't we all be on the same side? But I was very glad to have the support of Jeanette Rankin and the great state of Montana. Later in 1917, America entered the Great War. People thought that we would step aside. They thought that we shouldn't picket a wartime president. But we couldn't stop. We shouldn't be at war in the first place. We even used the president's own hypocritical words against him. One banner read, "Kaiser Wilson, have you forgotten your sympathy with the poor Germans because they are not self-governed? Over 20 million Americans are not self-governed. American women, take the beam out of your own eye." I understand that picketing posters are a little shorter today, but that's fine. So this banner and others got us a lot of press, but it also got us some negative attention from male onlookers. One day, men started some violence. They were throwing things at us, hitting us. There were other men who were trying to defend the women. And when police came to the scene, we were the ones who were arrested, and so were the men who were trying to help us. Our charges? Obstructing traffic. And when we refused to pay the fines, we were sent to jail. Why should we pay a fine? That would be an admission of guilt, and we have done nothing wrong. We were standing silently on the sidewalk, holding some signs, practicing our rights under the First Amendment of the Constitution. We were sent to a women's workhouse prison in Virginia. I was given the longest sentence of 7 months. On Lucy Burns' first night, which she later called the Night of Terror, she tried to fight back. She demanded to be treated as a political prisoner, but they ignored her. They tried to force her to undress. When she was fighting back, they tied her arms up, and she was chained up like this all night long. They were beating women, even older and frail women. Several other women wanted to support Lucy Burns, and they held their arms up in solidarity all night. The cells were so small that you could touch either side by holding your hands out like so. Each cell had a single toilet which could only be flushed from the outside. We couldn't even flush our own waste. The cells were dirty and rat-infested. The food was unsanitary and had worms in it. I wasn't going to eat that. I'm a vegetarian. So the hunger strikes began. Once again, the force feedings began, and I was tied down to a chair. When I refused to open my mouth, they shoved a tube down my nose, and they put a funnel on top and poured down raw eggs. I was then sent to a sanitarium where they tried to declare me insane. I had to watch what I said because I knew they were looking for any excuse to declare me hysterical or crazy, and I tried not to speak out against the president directly. Once news spread to the press, there was a public outcry. And finally, in November of 1917, all of the women were released and the charges dropped. Lucy Burns has the record for most time served at 6 months. That women's prison is now known as the Lucy Burns Museum. 2 months later, January of 1918, Woodrow Wilson came out in support of the 19th Amendment, although he claims I had nothing to do with it. As Mrs. Catt had explained, the amendment all came down to Tennessee. I started working on a suffrage banner, white, yellow, and purple, the colors of suffrage. Each time a state voted for the amendment, I would sew a star on my banner. I wanted to be there in Nashville to show my support for the women there, but I did not have the funds to travel. So I worked on my correspondence. I even sent a telegram to President Wilson, thanking him for his eventual support, whatever the reason. I guess you can teach an old dog new tricks. I had Suffs in Tennessee who were keeping me updated. Sue White, Betty Graham, and Anita Pulitzer worked hard to convince the Tennessee representatives there. They told me that Mrs. Catt was there, and she even jumped the gun saying that we had the votes when we didn't. It was taking a very long time, and I was worried because it was a southern state. But once I got the news that we had the votes, and the amendment was official, I sewed my final star on my banner, and I unfurled my banner from the balcony of Suffrage headquarters in Washington, letting the world know that the amendment was official and we had Tennessee. We could now vote. It was very exciting. My friend Mrs. Elva Belmont told me that she would not vote until she could vote for a woman for president. My work was not done. Women of color are still often barred at the polls. Indian women cannot vote yet as they are still not considered citizens. Language on the ballots is often deceptive, made to confuse voters who do not have the privilege of higher learning. And I was inspired by my friend, Ida B. Wells Barnett, who I had met previously at the parade. She was born a slave, and she lost her parents at the age of 16 to yellow fever. In Memphis, she became a journalist, and she was the only one there reporting on injustice to the Black businessmen in her neighborhood. Black businessmen were being lynched. She was the only journalist reporting on it. Some people didn't want to hear the truth, and they burned down her office. They even threatened her. Fearing for her life, she left Memphis and moved to Chicago, where she continued her work as a journalist, and she spent her entire life fighting for civil rights and women's rights. I was inspired by her. Shouldn't we all be supporting each other's causes? So I joined the civil rights movement as well. I got my law degree, and I started to work on a new amendment, an equal rights amendment. I'll spend the rest of my life on it if I have to. In this amendment, I want women to be guaranteed rights during divorce. They should be guaranteed property rights. Women are working. They deserve to have the same salaries as men. It is my hope that years from now, women are exercising their rights to vote, because so many of us have risked our lives for this right. I also hope that people continue to picket and protest for civil rights, for women's rights. We should all be treated the same, no matter our differences. It's my hope that people are marching into the American Art Deco era.
And I'm Carolyn Hummel, and I played Lucy Stone. Thank you all for being here today.
Thank you all. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
My backdrop's seen a lot of action.